Okay, this video is a book review. Here is the book, The Genius of Christianity, by this man here, Chateaubriand, Francois Chateaubriand. It was published in 1802. And where this comes from is he had briefly turned away from, he was born a Catholic in France. He had briefly turned away from religion for a while, became an atheist, caught up in all the philosophe nonsense of Voltaire, Rousseau, Delambre, Diderot, Condorcet, and the rest, Helvetius. And he then, after, he saw the fallout of the French Revolution, 1789 to 1794, what a disaster it was. He actually had fought for the Royalists. He was wounded at Thionville, and then he had fled in exile to England, to London. And he received a letter from his sister. His sister, during the French Rev, had been imprisoned. His brother was hanged and killed by the atheists who took over France. His other sister died in prison. Then his mother died. His mother's dying wish and one of his sisters was that he should come back to the faith, to the Christian religion. He thought about it. He felt sad because he had made his mother and his sister very sad. They were very, very devout religious people that he had turned away for a while. He did fight, like I said, for the Royalists, for the ancient regime, so to speak. But he had really disappointed his family because of his behavior. And he was already a somewhat famous writer. But after he wrote this book, he became super famous. He was a really brilliant guy. He was like the smartest guy in all of France. Chateaubriand. Okay? So I'm going to go through some of what happened here. This book had a lot of influence on France. We're going to talk about the saving the wisdom of the ancient Greeks and Romans. No one else cared about the ancient Greeks and Romans except the Catholic Church. And it was in the Catholic monasteries that all of these books were preserved. Right from the beginning, and I've shown this in my other videos from the hidden history of science, it was the monks, like Boethius, like Cassiodorus, the Venerable Bede, Isidore of Seville, etc., and Benedict in the monetary system that preserved all these books. There were so many monasteries that even when the Vikings would come and the barbarians and burn one down and kill the monks, there'd be another monastery that would have a copy of the book, so we kept these ancient Greeks alive. This is on Mount Parnassus with Apollo. Okay. The ancient Greeks are the most brilliant thing by far in the ancient world. There's nothing even close to the ancient Greeks. Okay. Here's Alexander the Great bringing animal specimens to Aristotle so he can classify them, by Philippe de Champagne, the French painter there. The love of painting and sculpture. No one else cares about painting and sculpture except for the Christians. Look at all the other cultures and religions. They all stink at painting and sculpture, okay? Western civilization really developed in Europe, which is combined, of course, with Italy and the Mediterranean. And then it moved to the USA, the first world, the new world. And everything else was third world, okay? All the cultures were not equal. There's nobody else that's making beautiful paintings like this. This is by William Bouguereau, the French painter, in 1899. Just look how beautiful that is. It's spectacular. It's magnificent. Okay, and the other thing is it's in the blood of a Christian to love art and painting. I have written several books about art and painting. I have collected many tens of thousands, okay? I have studied painting so much you wouldn't even believe it, how many days I spent the whole day going through paintings and classifying stuff. And there's tons of paintings like this where it's the pride of the country to show its great art. So here is in France, in the Louvre, 1825, they're passing out awards for their painting competition, who has the best paintings. It was a tremendous thing of national pride, and the great painters became very rich. Okay, here's another gallery at the Louvre. This one by Samuel Morse. He kind of, is back and forth, France and England, France and USA. He made the Morse code as well. And again, it's just in the blood of Christians to love painting. We have something to paint, the Christian story. And we also love painting about the ancient Greeks and Romans. And of course, there's portrait painting and all that other stuff too, and paintings of chivalry and whatnot. Okay, so I won't show too many more of these, but I'm telling you, there's tons and tons of these paintings. Here's at the Grand Gallery at the Louvre. And they also built the Louvre for their paintings because the French had tremendous respect for culture and paintings. France was considered like the Athens of Europe. Athens was the greatest place in ancient Greece, the most intelligent, cultured and scholarly and worldly and sophisticated. And so was France to Europe, and especially Paris. The Louvre Art Museum is in Paris, and I went there a long time ago. Okay, here is a fountain, and this is sort of, it's Apollo with nymphs, but it's really like King Louis XIV with his handmaidens there. But the sculpture is magnificent. Christianity produces the best sculpture. I really should have put Michelangelo's Pietà, the greatest sculpture ever in the history of the world. And the sculptures of Bernini as well were fantastic. They're the two greatest sculptors. There's lots of other great ones too. Canova, for example. Okay, here's Reims Cathedral. Notre Dame is a magnificent cathedral as well. The outdoors of the cathedrals in France are the best. Okay, I think in Italy they have the best interiors on their cathedrals because the way they combine their paintings and their sculpture and their stained glass windows. Okay, but I'm just showing. Here's Reims Cathedral, just spectacular and beautiful. Inside the west facade at the door. Beautiful at Reims Cathedral. Here's the front of Reims Cathedral. Okay, Old Testament kings and prophets. It's just spectacular. You know, the people who made these things. Here's Chartres Cathedral. Here's Chartres Cathedral. The light coming in, how spectacular and beautiful that is. The rose window with Christ in the center. Chartres Cathedral. So look how beautiful that is. How could anything be more beautiful than that? It's spectacular. Here's Chartres Cathedral with the organ, the statue right there by the altar. Here's Sainte-Chapelle. Look at that. It's the most spectacular and beautiful indoor cathedral in terms of its stained glass windows and the light they let in. It's just divine, okay? And this vaulted ceiling looks up towards the heaven. It's just spectacular. Look at that. It's just stunning. Here's Notre Dame Cathedral. So, the cathedrals are the most beautiful window buildings, architecture ever in the history of mankind. And they started building these back in the 1200s. And what would give them the ability to do it? They were poor. Over 90% of the population was just subsistence farmers. Yet the bishops and the priests, they scraped together enough money to pay the craftsmen to build these things. And they would take sometimes over 100 years to build. But what faith they had, what pride they had to want to produce something magnificent in their cities like this. Okay, and the cities competed with each other. Who could have the most beautiful cathedral? Here's just another painting of Notre Dame. Okay, now the beauty of the angels. And he talked about how the whole psychology of Christianity, it's so beautiful. It's the most aesthetically beautiful thing in the whole world. Okay, here's the angel Gabriel at the Annunciation to tell Mary she will be the father of Christ. There's the Holy Spirit coming in to impregnate her, the Virgin Mary. It's just, and this is also Philippe de Champagne. He's another magnificent Christian artist from the 1600s. And, the idea of the angels that decorate the painting, the layers of, mankind on earth, the angels, and then God above, the whole hierarchy of being and all this stuff. It's just a beautiful, spectacular way to look at the world. Okay, and the innocence and beauty of this one by William Bouguereau, again, the French artist. That Philippe de Champagne was a French artist as well. France had a lot of magnificent artists. So here's Innocent, okay? That's sort of, what life's all about. Mother and child, okay, the lamb, and the man exists to sort of protect and provide for that. That's what life's about. Okay, and the great music, gosh, so here's another painting of Mary and child and the angels playing music for her. Christianity developed polyphony music, the Gregorian chant, musical notation. It all comes from the Christians. And then in the Vatican, they funded the great composers. And they had all these great composers from the early days of Telemann, Arcangelo Corelli, Vivaldi, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Handel, Liszt, Schubert, Haydn. It goes on and on. They're magnificent. It's only Christianity. There's no other culture doing this. All the other cultures have very, very little cultural achievement in comparison with Christianity. Almost nothing. Okay, let's be honest. Here's Bach. Here's Handel. All the great classical music composers from Germany, and the best ones were from Europe, but all the best ones, for the most part, there's a few exceptions, were from Germany. Bach and Handel's Messiah. Here is Amadeus Mozart. This movie, by the way, the two greatest movies ever made about creativity are Amadeus and The Agony and the Ecstasy about Michelangelo. Okay, here is Amadeus Mozart conducting in the movie Amadeus. Okay, it's a magnificent movie. It's one of my favorite all-time movies. I love that movie. It's so great. Here's a quote of Beethoven, and just to get a sense of the mind of the true creators. Not all these modern scumbag atheists who are good for nothing, worthless people. Here's Beethoven's quote. The vibrations on the air are the breath of God speaking to man's soul. Music is the language of God. We musicians are as close to God as man can be. We hear his voice. We read his lips. We give birth to the children of God who sing his praise. That is what musicians are. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that is how the greatest, most creative people who ever lived on planet Earth think, okay? Bach said, every composition I make is to the glory of God, to the praise of God. Okay, Michelangelo, everything I do is out of love for God, praise of God. I put all my hope in him. Okay? The greatest, smartest, most creative people who ever lived, that's how they are. Isaac Newton, every discovery I've ever made was an answer to a prayer. Okay? So, people say to me sometimes, why are you a Christian? Why do you think Christianity is so great? I'm like, the greatest people who ever lived, the smartest, most creative, nicest, most thoughtful, best people were devout Christians, and so am I, okay? My mother was the greatest person I ever met in my whole life, and living person that I ever saw. She was the most devout person you'd ever seen in your life. She always did what was right, no matter what the rules were. She would break the law to do what is right. I saw her do that many times. She always did what was right for the people involved. Okay, the sacraments, how they provide peace, and they help structure life in a very good way. The baptism at birth, the first communion, the marriage ceremony, the last rites for the dying, the whole story of the Passion, both from Christmas, the birth of Christ, from Easter, the crucifixion of Christ, okay? It puts a whole structure to life, and with the Catholic Church, you have all the saints' days. And this is what Chateaubriand is talking about. He's talking about Christianity isn't just a religion for trying to go to heaven. It's what shapes all our culture. It's what shapes all our holidays. It's what brings joy to us. It's what inspires our art, our literature, our sculpture, our architecture. All that, virtually almost everything that is good in France comes from Christianity, is what he said. And he was right. Celebration of the family. Christianity is all about life, okay? It's all about, here is the Christ child, baby Jesus, with his earthly mother and father, and then here is the Trinity. So this is the earthly Trinity, so to speak, and here's the Holy Trinity with the Holy Spirit and God the Father up above, and then the angels as well. It's all just beautiful, and it's nourishing. It's about life. Go forth and multiply. What does modern atheist culture says? It says, we got to reduce the number of the people in the population. It says atheistic Darwinism, survival of the fittest. All these poor folk, they can't handle it. They don't deserve to live, okay? We need to castrate the children in the public schools. We need to euthanize old people with the MAID and medical assistance in dying. Modern atheistic Darwinism culture is a culture of death, okay? It's evil, and the pros are just too stupid to realize that. But that's what it's all about, okay? Christianity is the culture of life. It's like the opposite of atheistic Darwinism, okay? Okay, the whole university system comes from the Catholic Church. It came out of the monasteries, the monastery schools that became the cathedral schools. And, Charlemagne and Alcuin in 800 AD, started really improving the educational system in Europe. But then along came Thomas Aquinas. He was a student of Albert the Great, with the Dominican monks, the scholars, and the sun is a sign of the scholars. His book is a Summa Theologica, to summarize all the useful information of the world at his time, kind of like what Aristotle had done for the ancient Greeks. His name, St. Thomas. Aquinas is the town where he came from. He lived 1225 to 1274, okay? He developed the school of scholasticism, sometimes also called Thomism, and it showed that faith and reason go together. Religion and science go together. He unified faith and reason. He baptized Aristotle. It's sort of an Aristotelian-influenced version of Christianity. That is the Catholic Church. The more Platonic version of Christianity is Protestantism. And Protestantism, in my opinion, going through Augustine to Luther, leads to stupidity, this idea of grace alone. No, grace alone, faith without works is dead, Book of James. You have to also do nice things. That's why the Catholics were a lot nicer than the Protestants. And don't get me wrong, Protestants have done some good things, a lot of good things. The message of Christ doesn't vary. They'll change little things around in the translations of the Bible and stuff, but the message of Christ is always the same. Be nice, love thy neighbor, that what you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. Give each other the benefit of the doubt. He who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Go forth and sin no more. Okay? Aquinas emphasized the focus on life here on earth, not just the afterlife that nobody really fully understands. I've read thousands and thousands of pages of Bible commentary, and I can assure you, nobody really understands the afterlife, okay? They can't even agree on the Old Testament, all right? They don't even agree on a lot of the New Testament, all right? So they're never going to agree on these things. But everybody agrees on the teachings of Christ, and that's what matters. Okay, Aquinas got Christians to be more focused on living life here and now on earth, and showing that that studying God's creations is pleasing to God. We are created in His image, therefore we too can be creators, and He created a rational universe, and us, we being rational creatures, we can study His universe and understand it. And this motivated Christians to develop the modern scientific method, which came out of the Catholic Church. For example, 35 craters on the moon are named after Jesuit priests. Okay, it all came out of Christianity. Okay, Christian orators. Chateaubriand made the point that Christian orators are the best speakers. He said they're better than Demosthenes, okay, with his Philippics. Okay, they're better than Cicero. And this is Patrick Henry, the painting of 1775 in front of the House of Burgesses, where he gave the speech, "Give me liberty or death." But here's a typical Patrick Henry comment: "It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation of America was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here." Yeah, Christianity is the only. Everybody wants to go to the Christian countries. Nobody wants to move to other countries. Okay, they made the hospital system, okay, and they're the first ones to care. The Romans and the Greeks didn't care about poor people. Even Plato said if you're poor, it means you're a screw-up, and so what if you die? The Romans said, well, yeah, basically if you're poor, you should be a slave or you should die. Who cares about you? Okay, it was the Christians who made hospitals that would take care of the poor. They made orphanages. They made Mary Magdalene centers for former prostitutes. I'll show you more pictures of all this stuff. Okay, Christianity defends what is good in the world and helps those that are weak. Here's the orphanages. And look at what scumbags the philosophes were. So here's a typical piece of crap scumbag, Rousseau. When people say Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I want to puke, okay? I know the truth about the guy. I studied him. He is an atheist scumbag. He abandoned all 5 of his children. So he had 5 children, 5 of them. That's not a misprint, 5 children. He abandoned them all to orphanages because he didn't want to raise them. And then he writes a book about how to raise a child, Emile, like he's some type of expert on how to raise a child after he abandoned all his children. He's a scumbag piece of crap, okay? To do that to 5 children. Think about what a bad person it is, and that's how these modern people are. And these modern people, they make me sick. Look at Stevie Nicks, the singer for Fleetwood Mac. She had 4 abortions. So, it's bad to have 1 abortion, okay? But something complicated happened in the person's life. But to have 4 of them, that's really evil. Okay, now here's just some paintings of the poor orphan kid. Here's a poor orphan kid at the grave of his mother. Here's poor orphan kids at the graves of their parents. Thank God for Christianity to give these people a chance in life. And it also, it celebrates helping the poor. It's built into Christianity to be charitable and help the poor. Here's Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. Despite being the daughter of a king, she devoted much of her life to charity. And here she is feeding the poor. A nice painting by Edmund Layton. He's one of the greatest painters of all time. He's part of the, disciple of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood of painters in England who were inspired by the devoted painting of the Catholic painters before Raphael. And they were also inspired by the Nazarenes from Germany, who were a similar group, likewise, of devout religious painters. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is the Catholic religion, it loves people like Saint Elizabeth. Okay, it glorifies women. The Virgin Mary is the Queen of Heaven. It celebrates all the female saints. It celebrates the mother of the family. It celebrates marriage and protects the woman. Okay. They also made Mary Magdalene centers. Here's Mary Magdalene repenting from being a prostitute. And there's Mary Magdalene centers for repented former prostitutes, so they get another chance at life. Charles Dickens even funded one of these places, okay? But that's built into Christianity. Here's a YMCA. What that means is Young Man's Christian Association. The Christians do tons and tons of charitable work. The United States, being a Christian country, would donate more money than any other place by far when there were, tragedies in other parts of the world. Here's another monastery. Another orphanage. This one's for girls. Christianity does all these sorts of things. My mother was on the board of directors of an orphanage. My mother adopted several children into our house when I was growing up. My parents were both wonderful, good Christian people. I actually just got a phone call recently. Some of my relatives had told me, one girl, for example, her father died. He died on the table with a cardiac cath. They dissected the coronary, myocardial infarction, dead. They couldn't resuscitate him back in around 1980. And my father paid for all of their kids to go to college. My dad was pretty wealthy, but he was real generous too. He paid for her kids to go to college and to grad school. She said, I thank your father that I was able to go to law school because your father paid. Anyway, here's the most important painting of all time, Michelangelo's creation on the Sistine Chapel ceiling with God giving the spark of life to Adam. Man is created in the image of God, therefore he too can be a creator. And it's a rational universe, therefore he is a rational creature. He can understand it. Because he's created in the image of God, he's part divine, therefore entitled to natural rights of a special, partly divine being, including free speech, the right to own property, the right to privacy, the right to be treated with respect and not abused. He's not just cattle. He's not just owned by some secular ruler. So it's very important. That's what man is. It comes from Genesis 1:27. And and God, Christ is always, in the ongoing struggle between good and evil. Christ is the guide. The influence of Christianity on poetry and epics and chivalry. So the great Puritan epic is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Okay, about Satan's fall from heaven and the battle in heaven between the good angels and the bad angels. Here's Dante's Divine Comedy. Written around in the 1200s in Italy. And there's Purgatory Mountain in the back, hell on one side, there's beautiful Florence on the other side, heaven up above. And here is another epic written by Torquato Tasso, and it's Jerusalem Delivered. Okay, these are the great famous epics of the day. And of course we have King Arthur and the Round Table, and these are the knights of the Round Table hearing a inspiring blessing from the priest before they go on their quest for the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail was the cup used to collect the blood from the side of Christ when he was crucified, and the thought was that whoever touched it could be healed of their disease, whatever the disease might be. Sir Galahad, the brave and the pure, was the one who eventually was able to obtain the Holy Grail. Okay, now I'm going to read you just some individual lines and quotes from the book, The Genius of Christianity by Chateaubriand. First, a quote by Charles Spurgeon. The subtitle was The Spirit and the Beauty of the Christian Religion. Here's a quote by Charles Spurgeon, the pastor. The gospel does not need to be defended. It just needs to be let out of its cage, and it will defend itself. All of the modern churches have been castrated by that 503 exemption rule that they can't say anything interesting or they lose their tax exemption status. So they really don't even have free speech in the modern churches, Protestant or Catholic nowadays. They'd be better off getting rid of that tax exempt status and having good preachers that people would actually want to go listen to. Here's some quotes by Pat Buchanan. He says, when the faith dies, the culture dies. The civilization dies. The people die. Christians are only having one child. This is demographic winter. Muslims are having many children and moving to the West. The West used to be a child-centered society. It has become a self-centered society. Christendom is dying out. Islam is rising. Okay? All right, now we're going to get into Chateaubriand. So those are like introductory quotes. Now we're going to go straight with Chateaubriand. I talked about it being his mother's last dying wish that he would return to the Catholic Church. And his sister said the same thing. And he was a brilliant guy. He was the smartest guy in all of France. Okay? He realized his mother was right. He said, I wept and I believed again. And he had been studying Christianity because he knew he had screwed up. He knew he had messed up. Felt so bad that, his mother and his sisters were imprisoned and dying, that his brother was killed, his sister-in-law was killed. They were hanged by the atheist mobs and he himself barely escaped with his life. The atheist mobs were at the gates of his house, and they had a bunch of heads of aristocrats on pikes, and they were coming for him and the rest of his family. And he said, look at what atheism has done to France. He said, atheism has led to the destruction of France. It has led to the guillotine and 50,000 heads on the ground, to the destruction of the churches in France, to the execution of the priests and the nuns, to the angry mobs walking the streets with the heads of aristocrats on pikes. And he felt so bad about what had happened to France. He felt so bad about how he had made his mother and his sister sad in the last years of their life. And again, he was in exile in England, in London at this time. And he realized that almost everything good in France had come from the Catholic Church. And he wanted to redeem himself, to make up for having been such a jerk and for making his mother and his sister so sad before they died. So he decided to write a book about Christianity and what it had done for France and the world. And that is the book, The Genius of Christianity by Chateaubriand. It was too late to save his mother and his sister, but he would try to save France and the Christian faith in France. So, he was a pretty confident guy. You have to be confident. Look at the size of this book. He summarized everything in Christianity. This book is 800 pages of small print, okay? It's a monster of a book. I read it cover to cover, okay? And he considered himself the smartest man in France. He considered himself the best writer in France. And he said, this is my mission, to remind the French of what they have lost, to restore hope to the French people and hope that France can rebuild itself. He felt, I must do this. He felt he was the only one capable of challenging the lies of the famous philosophes. The philosophes were still very well known and famous in France, like Rousseau, the scumbag who abandoned 5 of his children, Voltaire, the evil, ungrateful piece of crap who was educated by the Jesuits, and he turned his back on them and helped destroy them and get them kicked out of France, Diderot, the evil scumbag, one of the co-authors of the Encyclopedia, piece of crap, D'Alembert, Helvetius, Condorcet. Okay. So Chateaubriand noted that the Roman Catholic sacraments are a guide and a comfort throughout life. We talked about some of these: baptism, communion, marriage, the church prayers, the beautiful music, the daily church bells, the last rites. They put a structure to life that adds meaning and joy, that it had inspired the greatest buildings ever in the history of mankind, the cathedrals, the greatest art ever in the history of mankind, all the paintings, the sculpture, Michelangelo, Raphael, Bernini, Canova, it goes on and on. The best music, the best literature the world had ever seen. The kindness of the Roman Catholic doctrine led to the building of hospitals and charities for the poor, the Magdalene centers. The brilliance of the monasteries with the Roman Catholic monks saving the books of the ancient Greeks and Romans, developing the agricultural system. The religious monasteries also provided a place to stay for pilgrimages, people during their travel. They housed them and they fed them. Okay, they would also take in poor people from their local towns. The monks developed agriculture. They developed the plow. They developed the horse harness, which made it better able to plow than were the oxen. They developed the stirrup. All of these things they developed to improve agricultural yields, rotating the crop fields. They built the clocks. They improved the calendar. They did the astronomy. They were like the original scientific workshops, okay? They built the university system in Europe run by the Catholic Church, by the Vatican. It was all in Latin. The scholars could travel between the different colleges. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Albert the Great, the scholasticism system, and then other geniuses like, Abelard and Eloise, okay? Paganism promoted slavery, but he noted the Roman Catholic Church was doing its best to get rid of slavery everywhere in more and more places. Okay, he noticed how the great poets were inspired by Christianity, like Dante, Tasso, and Milton, the great playwrights like Shakespeare, the great scientists like Newton, Leibniz, Bacon, Pascal. The religious military orders helped to keep the roads safe for Christian pilgrimages, like the Knights Templar, for example. The honorable behavior of chivalry, okay, and the legends of King Arthur and whatnot. The loss of religion leads to degeneracy of genius. When the national religion loses its influence, as it lost in Athens and Rome, the talent of the people disappears along with the gods. And that's true. Look at the modern world. It can't create beautiful art, beautiful literature, except for the people that are still religious, with very few exceptions. He says the muses then consigned the population, the atheist population is consigned to barbarism. People who no longer have faith in the muses no longer help them. They no longer do genius-level work. Okay, your pop culture turns into scum. Every writer who refuses to believe in a God, the author of the universe, will exclude infinity from his work. Yeah, if you take the divine out of writing and that sense of connection to our past, to the Bible, to the ancient Greeks and Romans, it ends up being slop, garbage. Okay, Rome is the eternal city, but with the Catholic religion, France was the Athens of Europe. Okay, he loved France, and he remembered how France could be, and he wanted to restore that. And there's been other great men of France who had said, if you lived in France before the French Rev, you know how great life can be. I think that was Talleyrand who had said that. Okay, he says, a writer without God confines his intellect to a circle of clay from which he has no means of escaping. You'll see atheist-style writers, they make little fart jokes, and they can be kind of funny and clever, but they never have these big transcending themes that make you want to go back to the book and that influence your life. All the masterpiece novels, they're Christian. Look at Les Miserables, okay? The bishop forgives Jean Valjean, and Jean Valjean's this great man. He saves Cosette, and he does all kinds of wonderful things. Okay, look at Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Alyosha, the one brother who was religious, the most religious, shows you how to live, okay? The great intellect of Ivan can't save him, okay? The lack of an intellect in Christianity makes Dmitri weak. It makes Smerdyakov weak, okay, in Brothers Karamazov. Okay, let's see, what else does he get into next? He felt that Christianity had a giant, big, positive influence on French culture, and he felt that it was time to leave the Enlightenment, that reason alone had failed. And his book became very, very popular in France. And it was part of this movement to get away from enlightenment. Reason alone does not work for man. It turns him into an evil beast. And to move upward to romanticism in literature. The romantic movement in literature looked back to the Middle Ages and Christianity for its inspiration. That's not always widely acknowledged, because people sometimes think of romantics. They think of the scumbags in England, like Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron and Mary Wollstonecraft, Shelley, and they were crazy people, okay? But Romanticism was largely about being inspired by Christianity and paying attention to one's emotions as an important part of life. And so mankind is best when he's aware of all, the big three, his emotions, his reason, and his religion. You combine all three and you get the high points in culture, literature, art. Chateaubriand had traveled quite a bit. He had been to France, of course, England, USA, Greece, Italy. He actually traveled around, the pioneer, undeveloped areas of America and got a sense of what that was all like. And the more he traveled around the world and saw things, the more convinced he was that the greatest thing in the world was Christianity. And I would agree with that. I studied a tremendous amount of history, literature, art, cultural stuff. And I'm telling you, 99% of the good stuff comes from Christianity. It's just a fact. With the other cultures, they just don't have it. Even most of them forbid it. Look at most of the other religions. They forbid painting, okay? Some of them forbid music. How are you going to create great painting, sculpture, and music if you forbid it? Okay, so what else? So Chateaubriand, here's the closing statement. He says, the Christian religion is so excellent in its effects on mankind that it must come from God. Christianity is not just a way to happiness in the afterlife. It is what brings happiness to mankind in this life. Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world.